So you would say on these blood work results that everything is fine and dandy and I'm ready to start another cycle. Wrong. A couple markers have been off for several months now, ever since I got double tapped. Vigorous Steve here with the rest of my blood work results. Yesterday we already discussed how Gorilla Mode Sigma was able to increase my total testosterone levels from 230 to 420 nanograms per deciliter after 5 weeks of continuous use at 4 capsules per day. Now, 420 nanograms per deciliter isn't exactly a number worth getting out of bed for, but, well, unfortunately for me, those are my numbers. So that's exactly what I need to do every morning. Wake up with 420 nanograms per deciliter on my total testosterone levels. But all things considering, knowing that I didn't inject any steroids for 3.5 months and only used ACG monotherapy for 2 weeks in duration because all of the other ACG that I used previously turned out to be bunk, didn't use any selective estrogen receptor modulators to do a traditional post-cycle therapy, I feel that 420 nanograms per deciliter is actually pretty goddamn good. And very comparable to when I was taking Clomid and tamoxifen last year for my post-cycle therapy, at which point I ended up with a total testosterone around 470 nanograms per deciliter, if I remember correctly. I do remember that my LH and FSH levels were a little bit higher, around 3.5 milli IUs per milliliter, and right now they're hovering around 2 milli IUs per milliliter. Still, those blood work results from last year, directly after a post-cycle therapy, and now after trialing Gorilla Mode Sigma for 5 weeks or so, numbers are very comparable, right? So take from that what you will. I'm not saying that Gorilla Mode Sigma is going to replace a post-cycle therapy in any way, shape, or form. Still, 420 nanograms per deciliter is kind of boring in the context of bodybuilding, so I am looking to start a new cycle reasonably soon. As soon as I beat this Flurona, which unfortunately is still present. We're at day 5 right now, but I'm getting better by the day. But we still have to review the rest of my blood work results to see if I even qualify to get back on cycle and see if I'm actually healthy enough to add the exogenous testosterone back in. Before we get into the results, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And hit the notification bell button while you're at it so you can get notified whenever a new video drops. Let's start with the urinalysis to determine if I was sufficiently hydrated on my blood work results. I always do a urinalysis and drink about 1 liter to 1.5 liters of water before I go in for blood work to make sure that I'm sufficiently hydrated and also can convert that with the specific gravity, which is one of the markers which is contained within the urinalysis. In this urine sample, my specific gravity was 1.013, indicating adequate hydration. I drank about 1 liter of water before going in for blood work. Again, normally I would drink about 1.5 to 2 liters of water, lowering the specific gravity towards the bottom of the reference range. And if you don't drink any water before you go in for blood work, you see that the specific gravity is towards the top of the reference range. Again, specific gravity measures the amount of particles which is present within the urine compared to water, which is demineralized and doesn't contain any particles. The pH of my urine was 5, slightly acidic. That's probably because I had a full cup of coffee before I went in for blood work, so not entirely fasted. I don't consider coffee to have any significant caloric value, but it can alter the pH levels of your urinalysis as well as your glucose levels when you do your fast glucose readings. All of the other urinalysis results are kind of uneventful. The color of my urine is yellow. Appearance is clear. Again, if you don't drink a lot of water, your color might be orange or dark yellow with a turbid appearance. Again, that also indicates insufficient hydration or proper dehydration. Glucose negative, protein negative, blood negative, nitrites negative, ketones negative, urobilinogen negative, bilirubin negative, and leukocytes negative, and all of the other markers on my urinalysis fall within normal parameters. So all in all, perfectly normal urinalysis results. Let's move over to the complete blood count. Wet blood cell count is a little bit elevated from baseline. Usually I'm around 5,000 cells per cubic millimeter, but in this case I'm 7,000 cells per cubic millimeter. If I were to go back on a TRT protocol or a full-blown cycle, my white blood cell count would come down to around 4,000, 4,500 cells per cubic millimeter, which is quite common when you're taking anabolic androgenic steroids. Hemoglobin is only 15.5 grams per deciliter. Hematocrit, a very low 45%, and red blood cell count 4.9 million cells per cubic millimeter. Now you see that the hemoglobin, hematocrit, and RBC count is actually quite low. And that's because, again, I haven't been injecting any anabolic androgenic steroids for over 3 months now. You see that at the 3-month mark, hematocrit starts to plummet towards the bottom of the reference range. And that's because red blood cells have an active life of about 90 to 100 days. And when you take the steroids away, the red blood cells will still stay active for 3 months afterwards. But without the presence of supraphysiological testosterone levels, and you go back to endogenous levels or subclinical levels, which was the case with me, you see that new red blood cell production is severely diminished compared to where it was before, in which case hematocrit levels come down to 42-45%. So if you want to have a therapeutic phlebotomy, but you can't afford or can't get a therapeutic phlebotomy, you can't do a blood donation and you can't fast for a week, which is also known to drop your hematocrit level with about 2 points, give or take, all you have to do is come off cycle, wait 3 months, and your hemoglobin, hematocrit, and red blood cell count will all reset within this 90-day to 100-day period to somewhere middle to bottom of their reference ranges. You don't have to do anything fancy, you just have to stop the steroids. On the rest of my results, my mean corpulus volume, mean corpulus hemoglobin, mean corpulus hemoglobin concentration, and red cell distribution width all fall within normal parameters. Platelets are a little bit on the lower end of the reference range, but not alarmingly low. But when we look at my white blood cell differential, we can see the first signs of trouble. Neutrophils are 80%, and lymphocytes are only 9%. Luckily, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils fall within normal parameters. But when I saw that my neutrophils were elevated, lymphocytes were below the reference range, and my white blood cell count, my total white blood cell count, was a little bit higher than usual, I already knew that something was off. Now, later in the evening, I tested positive for the flurona, so that kind of confirmed my suspicions. So keep that in mind interpreting the rest of the blood work results. I had mild underlying flurona. Let's move over to the blood chemistry. Blood glucose, fasted state, even though I drank a little bit of coffee, 80 milligrams per deciliter. Normally it's around 70 milligrams per deciliter, but again, I had a coffee, so my blood glucose levels are slightly elevated beyond baseline measurements. Blood urea nitrogen, 14.6 milligrams per deciliter, a little bit lower than I was expecting because I am eating a decent amount of protein. I believe it's around 300 grams per day, give or take. And again, I'm eating about 3,500 to 4,000 calories on a daily basis because I wanted to sustain my size around 100 kilos, right, before I started going back on cycle. Creatinine, nice and low, 1.11 milligrams per deciliter. Uric acid, 4.1 milligrams per deciliter. And my total creatine phosphokinase levels are 1,300 units per liter. Now, for the last 3.5 months or so, I've tried to keep my CPK levels at least over 1,000 units per liter by bringing some sort of intensity to the gym, albeit that I was keeping 2 to 4 reps in reserve and never really pushed anywhere close to failure. Still, a CPK of 1,000 is indicative of training intensity. That's why I wanted to keep it a little bit elevated. A lot of guys would say that you had a heart attack when your CPK levels are over 200 units per liter, but it's just an indication of training intensity. And keep in mind that there's 3 different isoenzymes of creatine kinase. There's CKBB, the isoenzyme found in the brain, CKMB, the isoenzyme found in the heart, more on that later, as well as CKMM, which is the isoenzyme found in skeletal muscle. And total creatine phosphokinase comprises all 3 of these different isoenzymes. So if you want to see why your CPK level is elevated and you want to pinpoint the source of the creatine kinase isoenzymes, you need to do a specific test. And whether that's testing for CKBB, CKMB, or CKMM specifically, most places will have these blood work markers available if you specifically ask for it. And if you're a little bit worried about your heart health, check your CKMB along with your troponin T and pro-BNP markers to get an accurate representation of the functioning of your heart and whether your heart is getting enough oxygen in. So we'll discuss that a little bit later because I tested all of those markers as well. C-reactive protein, 1.8 milligrams per liter, which is a little bit higher than baseline, still not super high inflammatory territory, but still, normally my inflammatory markers, my high sensitivity C-reactive protein is about 0.5 to 1 milligram per liter, and now it's almost doubled. So even though you see that it's only 0.8 milligrams per liter increase, it's still an 80% increase. So don't be fooled by the numbers. If you have small numbers that only increase by one increment, it could still be an 80% increase. Keep that in mind. So this is an early indication that something was going wrong. I checked my homocysteine levels. Those are usually around 8 micromoles per liter. And my D-dimer is still very, very low, 112 nanograms per milliliter. I've been checking my D-dimer levels for the last 2.5 years or 2 years or so on a monthly basis just to see if there's any signs of abnormal platelets aggregation or the breakdown of blood clots. Again, my D-dimer levels have always hovered around undetectable below 60 nanograms per milliliter, as high as 150 nanograms per milliliter, I've believed. So this is within normal parameters for me. Still, I will keep testing this now that I've had Flurona. Let's see if my D-dimer levels will go up. I might stay elevated for months even after beating the disease. Let's move over to my lipid panel. Total cholesterol, 146 milligrams per deciliter. Triglycerides, nice and low, 37 milligrams per deciliter. Again, daily fasted cardio year-round. HDL cholesterol, 58 milligrams per deciliter, which I would consider to be a little bit on the low side. And LDL cholesterol is also on the low side, 84 milligrams per deciliter. But I stopped the ezetimibe almost 3 months ago. So I'm not really sure if there's some epigenetic adaptation of taking ezetimibe for close to a year, I believe, continuously on cycle, and having chronically low LDL levels. Now, I'm not complaining because I'm sure that when I add the testosterone back into the picture, my HDL will come down, my LDL will come up. And even though I will reintroduce the ezetimibe as well, these lipid levels will certainly skew for the worst. Now, it's going to be up to me to keep them as favorable as possible, but it's very difficult to keep your HDL close to 60 milligrams per deciliter and LDL below 80 milligrams per deciliter. Even with ezetimibe, you might need a statin for that when you're taking exogenous steroids or selective androgen receptor modulators for that matter. I would expect my HDL to come up a little bit higher. I've been eating a decent amount of fat, around 150 grams of fat per day, all coming from healthy food sources, that being the salmon, a little bit of steak here and there, whole eggs, plenty of seeds and nuts, avocados, olive oil here and there. So I would expect my HDL to be a little bit higher, but hey, it is what it is. The cycle is probably going to start next week, and then I'll have to keep track of my lipid levels even more closely. Moving over to the liver function test. Everything in range except for my AST, which is 35 units per liter. My LT is 30 units per liter. My gamma GT is nice and low, 14 IUs per liter. So I would say regarding the liver function test, we're all good. Let me discuss my Fibroscan briefly as well, which I did 2 months ago on April the 4th. Again, the Fibroscan results, they don't change overnight like your liver enzymes or some of the other blood work markers do. This is measured within a little instrument that is representative of a jackhammer. They put it on one of your ribs, then send sound waves through your liver and get back the results to give you an indication of how much fat and fibrosis or cirrhosis is present within the liver. So in my case, the CAP score, which represents the amount of fat which is present in the liver, was 218. That would indicate that my liver has approximately 5% fat, give or take, which is a normal and healthy amount of fat in the liver. Anything over 5% would be considered mild non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is a CAP score that falls anywhere between 238 to 260 decibels per meter, which represents approximately 11 to 33% fatty change within the liver. Now, if the CAP score falls anywhere between 260 to 290 decibels per meter, the amount of fat present in the liver might be 34 to 66%, and a CAP score over 290 decibels per meter might represent an even higher percentage, over 67%. So if you see a CAP score over 290 and your liver is literally sticking out to here, maybe it's time to consider some fasting and follow a detoxification protocol to get all of that fat out of your liver, so you can continue in a perfect state of health again. And that might take several years in duration. Again, it took me approximately 4 to 5 months before my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was completely resolved. And regarding the amount of fibrosis in my liver, on this Fibroscan, my fibrosis score was 3.3 kilopascals, which falls between F0 and F1, ranging from 2 to 7 kilopascals, indicating that there's little to no scarring present in the liver. Again, there's several different gradations. A fibrosis score of F2, which ranges between 7.5 to 10 kilopascals, indicates moderate scarring that is present throughout the liver. Fibrosis score of F3, 10 to 14 kilopascals, indicates severe scarring within the liver and even disrupts normal blood flow throughout the liver. When you get to a fibrosis score of F4, indicating 14 kilopascals or higher on your Fibroscan results, that means late stage scarring or cirrhosis, where the scarring is permanent and the damage is irreversible. So again, I really hope that nobody gets results over 14 kilopascals or higher. Preventative medicine and preventative health screening is where it's at, so you can make sure that your liver health and all of your other organs for that matter stays intact while using performance-enhancing drugs. And I wish somebody told me that years ago before I got my bout with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But again, this information was never presented by anybody before. So here we are telling you guys to do your Fibroscans as well. Let's get back to the blood work results. So to make a long story short, my Fibroscan shows that there's less than 5% fat accumulated within the liver, which is normal and healthy, and there's no cirrhosis or fibrosis present. Let's get back to our blood work results. Moving on to the hormones we didn't discuss in the previous blood work analysis video because that was only in the context of the sex hormones and the neurosteroids. My growth hormone levels were 5.28 nanograms per milliliter. Now in this reference range, you might say that I have very high growth hormone levels, twice out of the reference range. Sweet. But in reality, on the Western reference range, ranging up to 10 nanograms per milliliter, I fall right in the middle of it. So these are just normal growth hormone levels for me. Usually I'm around 4 to 5 nanograms per milliliter, depending on which time of day I check my growth hormone levels. IGF-1, 180 nanograms per milliliter. Fasting insulin levels, 5.4 micro-IUs per milliliter. Now, the reason why I wanted to check my insulin levels is because I've been using MOTS-C, 5 milligrams on Monday and Friday for, I think, 4 months in duration now. So that's long enough to see if that has a positive or negative effect on my fasting insulin levels, my fasting glucose levels or glucose levels throughout the day, or hemoglobin A1c levels. But as of now, besides the energy that I get from MOTS-C, so that is an added benefit and worth continuing to take, I can't really see any positive or negative effects on my blood work by introducing the MOTS-C in. Now, maybe if you suffer from some metabolic issues, MOTS-C would be an added benefit to improve mitochondrial function. Again, MOTS-C is a peptide meant for your mitochondria. It's not a peptide that you use. It's a peptide that your mitochondria use to facilitate energy production. So I did notice that adding MOTS-C in 5 milligrams twice per week, that my energy levels overall have improved. But I will say that NAD+ has a more substantial effect regarding my overall energy levels and how I feel from a health perspective. Again, there's nothing really tangible here regarding the injectable glutathione or the NAD+ or the MOTS-C for that matter. I don't see anything tangible or measurable on my blood work, no positive or negative changes from any of these compounds. So what I'll do is I'll do a little bit more of a deep dive and then make a separate video about these 3 compounds because I do feel that they're all highly beneficial together because they increase your antioxidant status and improve mitochondrial function quite substantially. So even though all of those will be purely anecdotal reports from yours truly, I do feel that these compounds offer their unique benefits, albeit that it's kind of expensive. So it's certainly not for everybody to run MOTS-C and NAD+ frequently. But if you're financially secure, I could highly recommend them. Free T3, free T4, TSH, all within normal parameters. Again, I discontinued the 100 micrograms T4 months ago. So I'm happy to see that my TSH is normal of the range and my free T3 is reasonably high on this reference range. Again, I've been eating a decent amount of food, so a normal functioning thyroid panel is to be expected. And that brings us to hemoglobin A1c, which actually increased over the last 3 months from 4.8, 4.9%, give or take, to 5.2%. So I don't think, in my case at least, that the MOTS-C had a positive effect on my hemoglobin A1c concentrations, which is the glycolated hemoglobin present within red blood cells when it reacts to glucose. So it's an accurate representation of your average glucose levels over the period of 90 to 100 days or so. So a 3-month average, give or take. So it increased from, let's say, 4.8 to 5.2%. I don't think that the MODS-C had anything to do with that. I think it's just purely because I've been eating more food. And, well, more food, generally speaking, even if you're on a ketogenic diet, just means higher glucose levels. Don't worry, I will get my hemoglobin A1c down to 4.7% again, because I'll be dieting and getting all this body fat off pretty soon. So besides my total testosterone levels of 420 nanograms per deciliter, which is pretty average for average people, but certainly not enough if you want to bodybuild intensely. Still, it's pretty good considering I didn't ice my testicles or follow any kind of post-cycle therapy after coming off cycle 3.5 months ago. So you would say on these blood work results that everything is fine and dandy and I'm ready to start another cycle. Wrong. A couple markers have been off for several months now, ever since I got double tapped. Yeah, that was not by my choice. Unfortunately, I heard a whisper, but a very reliable whisper, that was going to be required for long-term residents looking to extend their visas. And again, in December was at the height of the latest variant. And after much contemplation, outweighing all of the potential side effects of all the blue pill options that are available, I decided to go with the blue pill, which I regret highly. The first dose was a breeze, but the second dose, I got severe myocarditis and had to stay at home for 2 weeks, wondering if my heart was going to be okay. And ever since then, my CKMB has been elevated and my high sensitivity troponin T levels have been elevated as well. Now, there are several other variants of troponin. There's troponin I and troponin S, which are not elevated, so I don't continuously check those. As of my latest blood work results, my CKMB is 9.2 nanograms per milliliter, so that's, let's say, 30% out of the reference range. And my troponin T is 0.026 nanograms per milliliter, which is, let's say, almost double out of the reference range. Now, I've seen my troponin levels elevated several times, around 0.017 nanograms per milliliter following strenuous workouts. So I'm not unfamiliar with having this marker elevated following workouts, especially leg days. Like sometimes I would have a leg day on Saturday and check my blood work markers the next day, stay on top of my cardiovascular health, check my CKMB, NT-Pro, BNP, and high sensitivity troponin T levels, in which case only my troponin T levels were slightly elevated. Now, this is a known effect that strenuous workouts can increase your troponin T levels, just like they can increase your CPK levels quite severely. So I didn't pay it any mind. I haven't paid it any mind for the last couple of years. I've done echoes on my heart. I've done 48-hour Holter monitors on my heart. I've done an MRI with contrast. This is all before I decided to go with the blue pills. And that showed a perfectly healthy and normally functioning heart with normal blood flow. I've documented all of that on this YouTube channel. I'll link that heart video at the end of this one. But ever since then, ever since December last year, these markers have been elevated. Now, ever since then, I've done several follow-up tests, one of them being another echo on my heart, which showed that I had slight left ventricular hypertrophy compared to the previous echo, which I did a year ago after I came off cycle to resolve the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Again, I suspect that there's some muscle memory present because I did do a cycle in between training insane, right? Training close to failure and sometimes beyond. So I suspect that the left ventricular hypertrophy was already there, which was actually diagnosed a couple of years prior, that I had minor left ventricular hypertrophy and a slightly enlarged heart. Unfortunately, I don't have those results. I can't pinpoint them at the hospital where I performed those tests. And on this latest echo, my left ventricular ejection fraction was 60% with normal wall motion. There is eccentric left ventricular hypertrophy, not concentric, which is the thickening of the ventricle internally, making the chamber of the heart smaller. This is eccentric hypertrophy on the outside of the heart. The LV mass index is 126 grams per cubic meter. The diastolic function is normal of the left ventricular. There's trivial mitral regurgitation, trivial tricuspid regurgitation, as well as mild pulmonary regurgitation. Now, this is considered to be normal. This is very similar to the regurgitation index that I got on my previous echo over a year ago. So that means that there's a little bit of a backflow of the blood whenever valves are closed and blood is flowing from one chamber to the next chamber. It's a perfectly normal result. The RV systolic function is preserved. There's no intracardiac shunt or mass, no dilation of the aortic root and ascending aorta, and there's no pericardial effusion. But what's not included in these results is that I do have an aortic arch pushing my trachea to the left. Now this is congenital. It's been there my entire life. It's never bothered me. I can swallow food just fine. I can breathe just fine. But this is one of those incidental findings on x-rays and some of the echo results is that my aorta is big and it pushes my trachea to the left. When you look at these results, there's no indication that I have impaired blood flow to any part of my heart. Now, of course, an echo is not the best way to determine that. For that, we have MRIs and CT scans. And since I already did an MRI last year, I decided to go with the CT angiogram instead. Now, for that, I had to check my kidney function to make sure that my kidneys were up to standard, up to par, to process this radioactive iodine, which is administered twice, once at a small dose and once at a pretty hefty dose, to the point you can feel your body get irradiated. It got hot. It was actually quite uncomfortable. Luckily, a CT scan is way shorter than an MRI, which took 2 hours the last time I did it. At the MRI, they showed that I had a normal functioning heart, and the CT scan showed the same. Now again, a CT scan is purely for the coronary arteries and the larger arteries, so it's not super accurate to determine the blood flow throughout the heart entirely. What it is accurate for is to determine if you have plaque buildup. Now in my case, my CAC score came back 0. So that's very good to see, at least, right? Even though my CKMB and my troponin T levels have been chronically out of the reference range for the last 6 months or so, at least my calcium score came back 0. So I have been staying on top of my inflammatory markers and have done my absolute best to keep my lipids in range for the last 10 years using performance-enhancing drugs. Still, if we combine both the echo and the CT scan, it shows that there's nothing wrong with my heart, but the blood work says something different. So I would probably have to do another MRI to determine if there's a small point in my heart. I'm not sure how big or small that is, that doesn't get enough oxygen. Now, I talked about this with my cardiologist extensively and got a second opinion. In their professional medical opinion, they said that these changes in my cardiac markers are due to the left ventricular hypertrophy that I have. But I'm of the opinion, and even though I'm not a medical professional, I have been doing this for a minute or so and have the blood work to prove it. It is in my opinion that my cardiac markers are elevated due to the blue pills. So it is good to see that they are coming down with time. Again, I've also lowered my training intensity, so I'm not exactly sure if the troponin T and the CKMB are directly correlated to my training intensity. I will keep my close eye on it. Again, now that I've had Flurona, I will have to keep checking the CKMB and troponin T levels just to make sure that they're not steadily increasing after getting this bout with the sickness. And to be perfectly honest, I've seen this on countless other people's blood work results where CKMB and troponin T levels are somewhat elevated for weeks, months, if not a year in duration after either getting the Flurona or getting blue pilled. So I guess it's just a sign of the times. I'm not exactly sure if this is going to persist, if it's going to get worse, if it's going to get better with time. So far, we're 6 months ahead on my blood work results, and I see little change. Again, it is improving, but not the improvements that I would like to see. I will have to keep my close eye on it. I'm going to be very honest, I'm not in the mood for another MRI just to find a little patch that could potentially have a poor blood circulation or poor oxygen delivery. I guess this is something I'm going to have to live with, just like many of you guys are living with this, but you're not checking your CKMB, NT-proBNP, and high sensitivity troponin T or troponin I levels and other cardiac markers. My cardiologist told me not to worry. It is probably due to the left ventricular hypertrophy that I have, albeit that it's mild and have normal left ventricular ejection fraction. My heart appears to be healthy, appears to be well conditioned. There's nothing wrong with my heart rate or contractile capacity of the heart. Again, it looks perfectly healthy in their professional medical opinion. Still, I'm a little bit worried about these markers, and I will keep my close eye on it. Now, regarding of what I can do next, again, I have to keep my close eye on both of these markers to make sure that they don't get any worse. And if they do get any worse, even though I don't want to, that's probably another MRI. So until then, I'm just going to take it slow and step by step, do low therapeutic yet effective dosages. So I was thinking about 150, 156 milligrams testosterone enanthate per week, 125 milligrams primobolan per week, and 50 milligrams nandrolone per week. And the reason why I add nandrolone in after all of these years is because my knees are still bothering me. Now, I've done deep tissue massage therapy over the last couple of months extensively. I've stopped injecting my glutes. I've done a lot of deep tissue massage therapy on my glutes. I've used a little bit of TB500 and thymosin beta-4 on my knees, which ended up going systemic. Fingers crossed that it improved my cardiac markers, but it didn't. But still, my knees are not 100% up to par. It could be because I was clinically androgen deficient with low total testosterone and low estradiol levels, which made it not recover as well as it should have been. But as of now, I'm thinking about adding in a very low dose of 50 milligrams nandrolone per week just to help with a little bit of joint lubrication, increase the synovial fluid so I can actually train legs pain-free. This is my tentative thought of the cycle. I'm also thinking about adding in growth hormone back into the picture, 2 units per day. I'll probably have to build that up so I don't get severe water retention. So I'm thinking about test, primo, nandrolone, and growth hormone all at therapeutic dosages, and then continue with the MOD-C, the injectable glutathione, the injectable vitamin C, the injectable B100, the NAD+, and then maybe throw in a couple other things here and there. But only after I beat this Flurona. Again, I want to do a week in the gym to see if my training intensity took a beating from this bout with Flurona, if my lung capacity diminished, or if I get other kinds of stamina issues, which seem to be common with people who had something similar happen to them. So I'll have to go take it day by day, I guess. And then once I've made up my mind and I've finalized my upcoming cycle, then I'll make a separate video about that. Inform you guys how I'm exactly going to do it, because it's going to be daily micro-administrations through the subcutaneous route. So I'll save that for the next video. I think for now, I've given you guys enough on my current state of health regarding my sex hormones and all of the other markers which I tested as of recent. Do a little prayer for me. Hopefully next week I can get back to business. The brain fog that I have is terrible. That's why it takes hours to record these videos. So please, very sorry for all of the jump cuts. Sometimes I'm just not exactly sure what I was saying and I lost track of what I was trying to convey. I'll leave it here, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the description section. Leave me a comment in the comment section. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at VigorSteve. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys. I'm only 96 kilos. I was 100 kilos last week and I dropped 4 kilos. Well, I did do some fasting, 3 days of fasting, and now I'm reintroducing the food. So I dropped a little bit of weight. But man, I'm ready to bulk up in a good way, that is, in body composition way. So hopefully I can get myself back up to 100 kilos, stay there, get my six-pack back. Hopefully my stamina didn't take too much of a beating. And then we can go right back to the gain train and look a little bit more saucy for the YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.